Hello, we're back. This is Thursday. You want to keep that still life set up, and we are now today going to go into the actual project. Tuesday, we were leading up to the project so that you got familiar with making some nice clean lines, and now we're going to go into the aspect of it that gets to be very creative. And again, we're looking at this artist, Antonio Garcia, and I'm going to point out some very specific things in his work that I'm going to have you do in your work. That's going to add to what we did in our last class. So when we look at this piece here of Antonio Garcia, and I showed it to you the other day, and again, you do have access to it online. I need you to be looking at this piece and the other couple that I put on there over and over while you're drawing yours. So we're using the same still life. I have the same still life set up as I did on Tuesday. And now the idea is to come up with, we have our design set as we already talked about in terms of the arrangement of the leaves, and yours are all arranged. You might have to freshen up those leaves. I had to go out and cut some others down so they're not all wilted. But anyways, is what you're going to do. Now when you look at this, it's not just one clean contour line that goes around the whole thing like we did the other day. Now is what you're going to notice. In places, the line hardly exists. And in other places, it gets darker. In other places, it's a middle weight. And in other places, it fades again. And as you look through this, you're going to notice this pair behind. This thickness of this line is even thicker than this line. And so some of his lines get incredibly thick, which I need you to do with yours. When you're working with your range of pencils, you're going to be working with 2H pencils for very light lines like this. You're going to be working with HB pencils so you can get lines like this. You want them sharp. Then you're going to be working with 6B pencils, and you might have to make the line purposely thick. Your lines could even get thicker than this in places if you want them to be. So number one, we're going to work with a lot of line variation. There won't be any piece of fruit in your drawing where there'll be one weight of line going around the whole thing. The reason why that is if we keep these broken or open, your eye begins to travel out and move around through his design. So this piece of fruit ties to this piece of fruit. This piece of fruit, there's a little separation. This ties together. This has a little separation. You can't get out. When he gets into all these leaves and things in the background, he's using a dark series of lines, just like with your boxes. So if you really look at this whole design, is what you're going to notice, he uses a dark area here, not by shading. He's going to do a little shading of planes, which I'm about to talk about. But he uses a dark area here. It's a center of interest. He pulls you in. And then he moves another dark area over here. He groups together a whole series of dark lines. And then he leaves very light lines so that you gravitate back here. And then he pulls you over here. And so in this little sunflower or whatever it is, he begins to use thinner lines so your eye goes back. He uses thicker edges so that you come forward. But if you look at this area, you begin to see some places aren't as thick as others. Here he begins to go darker. So he's, even with the dark area, he doesn't outline it saying, this is just dark. He goes into it darker and lighter darks, okay, back and forth. So that's why I need you to constantly be looking at this while you're doing yours. I want you to think of it and very similar to him. So in the end result, there's a balance to the drawing. Some areas become darker than others. Other areas allow your eye to connect and lead through. The other little ones down here, they're smaller. They're a little hard to see. Some of these you're going to see online, so you will see more than just this one. So this one, as you can see, he uses a horizontal kind of design, and then he uses kind of a diagonal and an apple, and he's keeping his apples kind of open. In other words, hardly any line. You probably can't even see it. And he keeps his lines a little darker on the inside. So he's connected these two apples by doing a line like this and connecting it, and then he develops a series of darker lines with the things in between. The apples themselves, he hardly does anything to them. This one is pears on a tree. If you guys have apples on a tree out in your yard, it's even fun to just draw from those. I've done that myself. So with this one, again, you've got the line variation from dark to light. You've got thickness of line from thick to thin. You've got fuzzy edges in places, and you've got very distinct edges in places. And so again, it's the same idea. He is using a little blurred shading, which I'm about to talk about back on this one here. So with your apples and pears, to make it interesting, because there wants to be a certain amount of reality to this, he uses some planes, and that's what I want to point out. All of you know what planes are. So he's taking the back of this apple and he uses a plane to describe a little surface. He's going to do that over and over. He's going to use shadows. But his shadows, if you notice, he'll use shapes. This is a suggestion of a shadow. He's got them indoors on a table like I do, which I'm going to show you. I'm going to put a shadow in mine. But if you notice, he doesn't color it in black. The idea still is the line. If you make big black shapes, the line disappears and it becomes a different type of drawing. So mostly he's got an edge and a little bit of gray. He keeps this edge lighter, this edge darker, so it looks like there's a little transparency. So in here, you are going to see him using shapes of dark, as you can see in this one at the top of the apple where the stem connects. The setup I have, my apples are not connecting to the stems, but I set them up against the stems as if they are. You can do the same, of course, with yours. So in this, you're going to get some shapes, and like in here, he's suggesting at shapes, but you want to play them down. They don't want to be real dark. In this leaf, you see him suggesting a lot of shapes. So he's coming up with a top plane. He comes up with little shapes in here. On yours, you can do the same. So it's a very creative project. You can suggest that this, which is a modeled edge, it goes from dark and then gradates inside to light. Sometimes we do it the reverse, and it's very dark outside the piece of fruit and gradates in the other direction. I'm going to show you those few different techniques. So is what I'm going to do. I don't have time to draw out this whole still life because this is a long project for you guys. It's going to take you a good 2.5 to 4 hours to do this drawing. It might take you longer than the class period. You have no homework. And so the idea is to develop this drawing as nice and as good as you possibly can. If it takes you longer than 2 hours, do not rush through it. I'm hoping that this becomes a really nice portfolio piece for all of you. I've had students in the past do this. They came up with beautiful drawings. So I'm going to start and show you some of these things that I feel you're going to need.